I wasn't sure if Greg was going to add something to it. Anyhow, nice to see you guys, and thanks for joining after lunch. I think I'm going to stay down here a little bit, so just don't kind of block the way. But social listening, we've been doing this for quite some time. Let me just make sure this thing is working. We're actually 12 years old, so in the world of social, that's ancient. And we've continually had to reinvent ourselves as social has reinvented itself. Back in those days, you all might remember things like GeoCities and things like that, right? But we were named recently by Forrester as the top in consulting, research, data processing, and technology. We have actually two parts to us. We have a Revealed Context is the subsidiary that provides data processing and social data. And then Converseon is a consulting arm that does a wide range of research consulting. We spend a lot of time helping to set up global capabilities for social intelligence at large organizations, including companies like IBM and others. So social listening. How many people here are doing some form of social listening at this point, right? So quite a few. So the world of 1.0 social listening, there are many tools out there. But they do essentially the same thing in many ways. You put a keyword in, or what you call a Boolean keyword, which is a kind of a limited way to kind of define what you're looking for, and it'll pull back some basic metrics. It'll be sentiment, which is often very automated, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Who's talking, for the most part, kind of just venues and authors, but not much more. Some automated influence, which is kind of based on things like clout scores, which also isn't terribly helpful sometimes. And so if you're trying to ask the question, what are people saying about me right now, it can give you an answer for the most part. But the challenge is, and I call this sometimes the dirty secrets of social listening, behind the pretty charts and the graphs, the data, which is the foundation for any of these insights, is problematic and has been problematic. Most of the sentiment is about 60% accurate. There's an issue of the level of analysis that you do. So I'm going to talk about a couple of concepts called precision, recall, and relevancy. And if we forget nothing else today, whatever vendor or whatever solution you're using, hold them up to the standards of precision, relevancy, and recall. So precision is, if I'm reading a sentence or a tweet, how closely can the machine match 3 independent humans who look at that same record and come to the same conclusion? Because humans don't often agree with each other. You have to have, your gold standard is 3 independent humans, and you have to have adjudication if there's a disagreement. Recall is, how many signals do I get out of the data set that I give you? So I'll give you let's say it's a couple paragraphs or a blog post. There's 3 levels of analysis. There's the record level, which it'll just do the whole thing and say, well, it's basically positive or negative, which is helpful, not so much. There's sentence level, which is within a sentence. There's what's the opinion within a sentence, and then there's an entity level, which is there are often multiple opinions within a certain, even a tweet. I love this, I hated that. So you want as many signals coming out of that data set as possible. So you want very high precision, agree with humans. You want a lot of signals coming out of the data, and you want the data that you're analyzing to be relevant. Now, the reality is that many of these Boolean queries that you see, imagine if you're Sprint or if you're other companies, you get 10 to 15% relevancy in your data set. So add 60% accuracy, low number of signals, because most people do things at a record level, and about 15 to 20% relevancy in the data set, and imagine trying to model insights off of that data. Yet, that's what many people are doing. And that is essentially a good proof and point is, Science Magazine has written about this, is that every time Anne Hathaway is being talked about online, Berkshire Hathaway stock seems to spike. And this is true because the hedge funds use a lot of quants and they use a primitive form of sentiment analysis, so they can't disambiguate Hathaway from Berkshire Hathaway. Now, most of us are here in a regulated industry. The question is, can you accept that level of imprecision in your data to get to insights in an industry? And for the most part, the answer is drastically no. And I'm not the only one pointing this out. Not long ago, CMU and McGill did a study that talked about this very issue. As a lot of the studies and research coming out of this stuff are off target, but they also recognize the solution. And the reality is there is a solution, and that's what's critical, and that's where we talk about listening 2.0. which is, it's about using machine learning and other ways to kind of build more advanced models to be able to get to levels of precision in the data that you can start to find insights that are really meaningful and actionable. But the challenge is, at this point in time, this is from Forrester Research, it says, well, yeah, but a lot of people are using this social research. We all find this kind of interesting. But when we're using it for brand tracking, competitive tracking, et cetera, well, I'm hoping after today, we won't be using listening 1.0 for what we're talking about. So the next generation, it evolves from a different form of technology. One of the problems of this first listening 1.0 is it uses what we call rules-based technologies, right? Rules-based, basically it takes a dictionary of positive words and negative words, and it associates it with your brand. Well, it's within 2 words of your brand, so therefore it must be positive or negative. But the world is full of, especially social media, sarcasm, slang, and things what we call implicit sentiment, right? So if I say to you, I spent my entire lunch hour yesterday waiting in line to exchange my ticket at American Airlines, there's no word in that sentence within a dictionary base that would capture that as negative. But you know it's negative, and that's what we call implicit sentiment. The new technologies use parts of this dictionary-based approach, but what they really focus on is machine learning and what we call deep learning. It's learned from patterns of humans who have analyzed things before, and it makes probabilities. And so because of that, you can start to do things that were impossible before. So you can raise that 60% accuracy to near 95 to near human precision level. You can do things on an entity level analysis. And you can start to build things in terms of, and I'll show you an example of this, of getting your level of relevancy up to about 85 to 90%. Now you can start to do some modeling, and you can start pumping that data into things that are meaningful. And actually, the data has been shown in multiple peer-reviewed studies to be able to show it's now predictive in certain areas. And that's a big breakthrough for the industry. But when you think, if you just look at this pyramid briefly, if you think about the data coming through the bottom of the pyramid, there are these standard classifiers that you're all kind of used to. It's name, or it's it's essentially author, and it's sentiment, et cetera, et cetera. But the further you go up the pyramid, this technology allows you to get up or closer to the pyramid. You can break open these new uses and these applications for product development, for deeper levels of market research. Even we're starting to replace brand tracking and other things as well. And the important thing is that you can tune the data specific to a category. So it knows, for example, that the word small is good if I'm selling smartphones, but bad if I'm selling hotel rooms. And if you think about the condition states and other things that we're dealing with sometimes, language is really important. You can't take an off-the-shelf. This type of technology begins where your current listening platform ends. And this is where you can start to do some of the modeling. So for example, if you're just looking here, getting to the level of relevancy is very difficult. Trying to build these complex Boolean queries, and some of you probably built complex Boolean queries, and it's painful. We sometimes have people try to spend weeks building Boolean queries. Let's add this word, subtract this word, et cetera, to try to get to the points that are relevant. The new approach, which is embraced within the technologies that we have, actually use machine learning. So simply all you say is this is relevant, this isn't relevant, this is relevant, and it'll learn itself, right? So we don't have to try to guess what language permutations are needed to get to the relevant data that you need. In this particular case, we tried to say, could we isolate the food spam from the spam conversation online? The best Boolean query could get to 15%. Within a half an hour of building this, you got to 85%. So this is kind of the new approach around all of this. In terms of being able to get to the levels of precision and sentiment, again, we're getting to human level precision, and we're getting to this entity level extraction. I will make this available, by the way, because you can see, for example, how specific conversations will be mischaracterized as positive, negative, neutral if they don't do this entity level extraction. Just it's the way the language works. And what will happen is you'll come to false conclusions. Now, the other beauty of this type of approach is that you can now build your own custom classifiers. So it can be anything that 3 independent humans essentially will look at and agree on. So things like intent, things like patient journey. We can isolate the conversations that are happening within the patient journey, for example. We can isolate emotions. We can isolate, if we wanted to, we can either build classifiers to find adverse events, or we can build classifiers not to find adverse events. So I mean, essentially whatever you really kind of want to do within this technology. So we're moving away from just this sentiment and topic and tone, and we're starting to be able to see a whole plethora of new metrics that can be applied to the analysis of your data. So what you could do with this? Well, when you start to be able to do these things, is you can start to look at things in a much more interesting way. So we're going to see with the language. There's interesting conversations this morning about how do we align our language with the language of our patients and consumers, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we can now do this. Not only can we do it through traditional methods, we can look at it where the language changes within the journey, what it's happening at time of day, et cetera. And a lot of applications for this are things around search engine optimization and content marketing and other things as well. You can start to isolate the things that are unmet needs, because you can build classifiers of saying, people, wouldn't it be, I really would like to see, or I'd like to have this, like people asking for things, but there's not something to kind of fulfill that requirement. And this is an example for Parkinson's. It's the kind of content that they're looking for, and so it helps to inform the type of content you might want to create, for example. We also go beyond sentiment, and this is important, because within the basic classifiers, you have sentiment and intensity, and you have other things as well. But we also are able, through this language analysis, to get to things like emotion. And we use Plutchik's wheel of emotion, which are 8 different emotions, and there's levels of intensity associated with it. But what's interesting about that is that, and it's not just saying, hey, I'm really frustrated or I'm really angry, because, sometimes people say that, but you're capturing all the language that people use to express those levels of frustration without having to use the word specifically, right? That's where the machine learning comes in. And here on the right, you can start to map, for example, patient journey and the emotions throughout the patient journey here as well. We can also go a step further and start to mine around individuals. Now, I know there are privacy issues here. We deal with a lot of regulatory issues. We deal with a lot of regulated industries. But we can think about everybody who's been online and how many people are active in social media right now. We can mine your entire public conversation that you've had. For some people, it's 4 or 5 years at this point. We apply natural language processing technologies to it, and we can start to do segmentation. So we know what your interests are. We know your demographics. We know a lot of other information about you, and I'll come back to that. And we also know, not just when you're talking about a specific condition, so anybody who's kind of talking about diabetes, for example, we also know what everything else they're talking about and everything else that they're doing, right? So we're getting a full picture of who the individual is. And we're observing, right? That's all we're doing, is we're observing. This is public conversation data. So there are 2 ways to do it. We can go outside and we can find everybody who's talking about a condition and their caregivers, et cetera, and we can listen persistently across that as it changes in real time, always on. But we can also go from the inside out, where if we take just an email address and a name, we can match them to the social footprints externally, and then we can begin mapping those conversations too. Now we can do it we can anonymize the data, so you can look at it at an aggregate level, or we can look at an individual level, and we can start to follow it that way. We just did this for a big CPG company, 8 million names in multiple languages, including Russia, Japan, et cetera, et cetera. We actually had to send analysts to Russia because we couldn't take the data out of the country, so we contort ourselves having to do with this stuff. But we got about a 40% match rate. So this is powerful technology. We're not listening just on broad trends, we're listening at the individual level and then on the segmentation level as well. And you can start to break out all the different interests, et cetera, and start to do segmentation around all this stuff. So what does this mean? It means that this data, with the right precision, recall, relevancy, is starting to be predictive in many different areas. We did a study with Wendy Mose, a professor at the University of Maryland. What we did is we took 3 offline brand tracking studies for 3 different clients, took all the social data, and at the beginning there was no correlation between the 3. And what we found is when you started to build high relevancy, so we cleaned all that data out to only things about products and product attributes. All the job listings, all the advertising was cleaned out, and did some modeling, because things like Twitter tend to be a little bit more positive than different forums. You have to make some adjustments around that and some influence stuff. We got to a 0.80 correlation, which basically says this type of data can now be an effective surrogate on some levels for traditional brand tracking. But that's just the beginning. We did something with WOMA on the market mix modeling study that showed that the contribution of word of mouth is about 16% towards product sales, where a lot of CPG companies like Weight Watchers and others were involved in it as well. So we've hit this moment in 2015 where this kind of treating social data like a hobby, putting it to, setting it off to the side and kind of playing with it is kind of over, and very large organizations are starting to mainstream this into their organization. But it has to be along these standards. And so we're pushing it into all kinds of different areas: brand tracking, product launches, innovation, patient journey. I'd say one of the challenges that pharmas have in particular is they have multiple different solutions doing different things. Problem is, nobody's doing, for the most part, sentiment the same way. Whether it's record or entity or level, the metrics are all different, so you can't compare apples to oranges, and you can't roll this up into one single truth. So what we advocate is have a single truth of data coming into a system like a trunk of a tree, and then multiple different branches that connect into all these different areas. And you can have different people work off the data, but at least let it be the best truth. I need to wrap up here quickly, but I just want to say a couple of parting thoughts. We are at this new kind of breakthrough point in time. It's taken a while to get here, but in fact, Forrester Research this past week put out a new brief called Social Predictive Analytics is on the Horizon. So it's happening. They say machine learning and entity extraction is absolutely critical. Really seek that one single truth. If you do have a current listening platform, that's fine, but this picks up where that leaves off, and there are tools and things that can sit on top of that stuff to be able to do this further enrichment. Make sure you understand your precision, recall, and relevancy when you're looking at data. It's not so much a tool, it's the data that sits behind it. And through this, we can actually see how people, rather than researchers, articulate how they see us. And consider these social panels for this always-on intelligence, because they're quite powerful, and I think they're going to change, they're going to be quite profound. So that's it with my time. So thank you guys very much. Oh. My most important slide is like, how do you get this stuff? It's available through an API if you just want data, or through tools and applications that can sit on top of different platforms. BrandWatch, if any of you use BrandWatch, is a premium version that uses this level of technology. We also have a full range of research services, et cetera, that we do on top of that. So thank you. Now I'm really done. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. That was wonderful, Rob.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we have about 3.5 minutes left for Q&A. Do we have any questions for Rob? And wait for the microphone to come over so we can record it. Rob, if you want to add anything more? I got a question over there.
That's all right. I'm fine. Well, Greg will ask, of course.
On the brand, and I'm the one that was complaining earlier. On the brand tracking correlation, what was the focus of that work? Was it on a single brand metric? Was it on different components of the brand metric?
It was simply against their offline phone. There were 1,055 phone calls per month, in a traditional kind of brand tracking way. It wasn't on the attribute level, which is we're actually doing research now on the attribute level to see how that correlates as well. We did it across 3 different brands. They published one. The paper won actually the MSI award for best paper last year, and I would just encourage anybody to get deeper into all the methodology. I can send a link, or you can just Google, at social Wendy Mo, Converseon, and the paper's available as well. So,
okay,
cool.
But you are doing work now to see how much deeper that can go at the attribute level.
That's exactly right. And I mentioned, some of you might know Joel Rubinson. He's the former chief research officer at the ARF. He's a senior advisor of the company, and he's working closely with us on that actual research. Thanks. Any other questions? One over there.
To go from I guess it was an R-square or something of 0.02 to 0.80, I mean, that's incredible achievement. That's great.
Right.
When I look at the social media, the algorithms, my cynical views, they tend to be the same, but it sounds like you've added such degrees of quality control. Has that affected the pricing as well?
No, actually, the pricing really hasn't. I mean, it's programmatic. It depends if you're going through research. This is really evolution just of technologies that allow you to do what basically was human level analysis before at scale. And even before, when people were doing human analysis on top of the data, the problem was it was one independent human for the most part, and it didn't bring the level of consistency needed. So the pricing actually is not that. We process for some clients tens of millions of records per day through an API, and it's fine. It's really just the advancements of the technology. But you're exactly right. People think all algorithms are the same. Sentiment is all the same. It's not. Rip away that kind of facade of pretty graphs, and the substance is on these levels of precision, and that's what allows you to do the predictive analytics and things that we're talking about. But this is something that's happened only the last 12 months. So that's why it's kind of relatively new to the market.